The focus of this lecture is Augustine and the Confessions. To give you a little bit of background into the Confessions so that as you read it, it can kind of help guide your reading. So this will be the first of two videos. This one will focus on just kind of giving you some parameters so that you can read it. And kind of give you some categories to better understand what Augustine is actually doing in the Confessions. And then a second video will kind of focus on books 10 through 13, and I would make the argument that book 10 is kind of the key to unlocking the Confessions. So as you see here, it's titled Augustine, Is He as Platonic as We Think He Is? It's important to recognize the background here of the Confessions. Augustine is writing within a Neoplatonic social imaginary. Now, what do I mean by Neoplatonic? So Platonism, right? Plato comes centuries before Augustine, but there's a revival of Platonic thought. Plotinus, for example, is one of the main philosophers in this revival, kind of around the time of Augustine. And as you'll hopefully see, it's important to place the reading of the Confessions in the context of this Neoplatonic social imaginary. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about that social imaginary, talk about the hierarchical structure of reality that you find in this Platonic social imaginary. We'll talk a little bit about the Manichaean stuff, not much, but just to explain it to you, what is it? And then how does Augustine take this kind of Platonic social imaginary, Neoplatonic social imaginary, and then reinterpret God and Jesus Christ and Christianity in that context? And so we'll talk about participation. We'll also talk about his focus on love and desire. And one of the questions to ask is he simply a Platonist, a Neoplatonist, who takes Christianity and just reinterprets it? Or is he doing something a little bit more interesting, a little more complex? So that'll be a part of the discussion here as we think about Augustine's Confessions. So the Neoplatonic framework, so this is kind of looking at Plotinus. So we've talked about how Platonism is kind of hierarchical, and you have the world of the ideas and the forms, and you move down into kind of material reality. And so here what you have is a very basic understanding of kind of Plotinus's Neoplatonism. He wanted to emphasize that there exists an absolute reality that is one, that is beyond all of our categories, good, being, all of it. And out of that one, there's an emanation or comes reality itself. So noetic reality is the forms or ideas that we talked about. So if you remember tree and treeness, this would be the treeness piece. Now for Augustine, he's going to talk about this more in the terms of the mind of God, the forms existing kind of in the mind of God. Now, psychic reality then is the soul, and the human soul is made up of different parts. There's a higher and lower part, as we talked about with Plato. And the higher part is the part that can then connect up to the noetic reality, or the forms and ideas in the mind of God, to know the world. And then you have the physical reality that is simply the matter. Now, again, looking at this structure, we have to see how it's hierarchical. The higher up you go, the more real. The lower you go, the less real. And we'll see that here in a minute. So what do we mean by emanation? Well, it's a move from the higher to lower. It actually should read higher to lower, not lower to higher. So from the higher to lower, think of a fountain, right? So the water flows out. So there's an emanation from the one, the absolute reality, down into these other expressions of reality. And so for Plotinus, it was a movement from unity to multiplicity. Unity representing the whole, the universal, the eternal, the unchanging. Now, if you look at all of those words, Those are often words that, even today as Christians, we talk about God in those terms, or the divine. Plotinus isn't necessarily going to use that language. He's using more of um, the Greek kind of Platonic stuff. And then the multiple represents the particular, the temporal, the finite, that which changes. So think about trees, material trees that you see, and treeness. Treeness is the universal, eternal, unchanging treeness that gives shape to the material reality that become particular trees. And these trees participate in that unchanging, eternal reality of treeness to different degrees. And again, as we talked about with Plato, the important thing to recognize is that the material tree is less real than treeness. And again, there's finitude there. The tree is going to grow and die. It's going to change and so on. And that's where that less real piece comes in. Change, distortion, finitude, particularity, all of these things represent kind of a moving away from the higher reality that is unity in the universal and so on and so forth. So knowledge then of truth comes by participating in the higher. So the human soul or mind is able to participate in the divine mind by tapping into the forms and the ideas and so on. Now it's also important to recognize here that higher knowledge, coming to the truth about things, is to attain wholeness. Change in the Platonic structure is bad. It is part of the world of matter. It is not a part of the higher world. And so for Plato, the reason why you want to get out of the material world and into the higher reality is to be caught back up into the eternal, unchanging universal. So the purpose of truth and trying to seek truth is to try and attain wholeness, to see the totality of your life. So who are you? What is the I? And Augustine is going to wrestle with this. In this kind of a Platonic structure, it is about seeing the wholeness of your life, of your identity. Temporal life, which is the way we live life, right? We live it moment to moment, or it seems moment to moment. We grow, we develop, we change. That life is less real because it's lived in time. And time brings change. And again, it's this kind of experience that's moment to moment. And so that last line there, I say we only kind of see and experience life in fragments. And this is where that idea of living a fragmented life will come in. And we'll see that for Augustine, he's going to pick up on all of this, and he's going to try to give some understanding of what the Christian life then is all about. It leads to an interpretation of God, Christianity, and what is the Christian life about. So as we'll see, for Augustine, the focus is going to be on love and desire, because truth, in the Plotinus kind of Platonic perspective, truth is rightly directed love. What is it that you are loving? Are you loving the higher reality, the truth about the world? Or are you loving the wrong thing, which is the material or matter? So what Augustine is eventually going to come to recognize is that evil and sin in the world and the distortion of our lives comes from wrongly directed loves. We're loving the wrong thing. And it leads then to a disordered life. I don't know if you've ever felt that your life is just kind of chaotic and you just feel an uneasiness and you're just kind of doing all these things and it just, again, you can never find any rest. Augustine would say that is because you are loving the wrong things. So as you read the Confessions, well, let me say this. If you love the higher things, now what are the higher things? Well, they're the forms, they're the ideas. Now in the Christianity, what would we say? Love God, right? That's the highest. And in Platonic or for Plotinus, it's loving the higher forms. So when we come to recognize that treeness is the most real thing and not the material tree, it leads to a rightly ordered life. When we're loving the right things, when our desires are directed at the right things, our life becomes rightly ordered. Now, as you'll see as you read the Confessions, what are we getting? Well, it seems like an autobiography. And at some point, we'll talk about why it may not actually just be an autobiography. But what is he doing? He's narrating. Augustine is having a conversation with God. Okay? So he's trying to direct everything in the right way. But what is he narrating? He is narrating a life of misdirected love. You'll see from the very beginning, he talks about being a baby born into sin. So what is sin? Sin is misdirection, being directed in the wrong ways. And you're going to read about his sex life. He becomes obsessed with sex. He becomes obsessed with honor. He becomes obsessed with friendship. And I put his mom on there. This is Monica. It's a picture of him and Monica. Because you'll see that at a certain point, Monica plays an important role where he has a love for Monica. Now, what's interesting is Augustine is going to make the argument that like sex and honor and friendship and all of these things aren't bad, especially take the friendship thing. He is going to talk about how he had misdirected love for his friend. His love was directed towards the kind of temporal, right, friendship. But eventually what he's going to come to see is that when we rightly direct our love toward the higher things, beauty, goodness, justice, God, it orders these other things. So it's not that you can't love your friends. You should love your friends. But eventually you'll see Augustine is going to say we need to love our friends in the Lord. And when we do, those friendships get rightly ordered. Right? So as you read the Confessions, please be kind of recognize that this is what he's doing. He is confessing. He's talking about his misdirected loves. And it needs to be placed within this kind of Neoplatonic framework. So as you read the Confessions, think about these things. First of all, it's a prayer. He's constantly quoting the Psalms. And so he's talking to God. We'll talk about that at a different time. He is seeking the truth about reality. And it's going to lead him down different paths. It's going to lead him into Manichaeism. It's going to lead him then into kind of a form of Platonism. And what's interesting for Augustine is the relationship between his Platonism and Christianity, because it's the move into Platonism that eventually moves him to become a Christian. So pay attention to that kind of movement. You're also going to see this issue of participation. We cannot understand Augustine if we don't understand that he's living within a social imaginary that really emphasizes participation. The higher participates in the lower participates in the higher, and that the focus of truth in life is rightly directing love. Now, here's the other question that we're going to have to wrestle with. Is Augustine a Platonist? He's definitely influenced by it. He's definitely using the categories. But one of the important conversations to have at the end of the reading of Confessions is Augustine a Platonist? So hopefully this will help kind of guide your reading on the Confessions. And will kind of give you a framework to better understand what's going on.